Hello there, I'm Nate and this is Vintage Rails. So for today's video, we're at a very special place, at least special to me. This is Travel Town in Griffith Park. This is a railroad museum which features many relics and museum pieces on outdoor exhibit in Griffith Park in the city of Los Angeles. So we're going to take a look at each piece of equipment and I'll tell you a little bit about it from some research I've done. And if I don't know anything about it, I'll do an overdub for research later. You'll get the idea. So please enjoy this tour of the Travel Town Museum. So the first locomotive we have, when you walk in through the entrance, which is right over there, is Southern Pacific number 3025. Now this is a 442 Atlantic type built by the American Locomotive Company of Schenectady, New York. This locomotive is the only surviving Atlantic type 442 from that railroad. The Southern Pacific didn't have many 442s that I can think of. Just take a look inside the cab here. It says Southern Pacific a little bit. Most of these engines are in really bad shape. Now the next locomotive is Santa Maria Valley Railroad number 1000. Excuse me. This was built by Alco Schenectady, American Locomotive Company, at their Schenectady Works in 1920 for the Hetch Hetchy Railway for the city of San Francisco. The Hetch Hetchy was for constructing a dam to supply water to the city of San Francisco. Some of the linkage here. Now the wheels are much shorter and smaller, so this is a freight engine. Also used for some lumber operations. And in 1930 it was sold to the Newaukum Valley Railroad up in Washington for lumber. In 1944, it was sold to the Santa Maria Valley Railroad and retired by the 1960s when all steam was replaced with diesel on that road. And sometime in the 1950s or 60s, this was donated to Travel Town. Take a look at the cab. This backlighting's terrible. Makes good silhouettes. Now we have Southern Pacific number 1273. This locomotive was built by the Southern Pacific at their Sacramento shops. And it was donated in 1957 after it was retired to the Travel Town Museum. Now there's no numbers on the side or anything that's left, not even Southern Pacific on the tender. And there's not much in the way of controls up in the cab here. I believe all of the engines that are on display here were originally, or were fired with oil, maybe not originally. Since oil's so plentiful in California, even though the gas prices are sky high. Some of these are old enough that the bronze has rusted to green. There's some of the eccentrics. This place you can get up close and personal with the steam engines. Then on the other side of the fence, nearby where the road is the remains of an 1880s horse-drawn tram car. There is not much information about this thing. They think it's 1880s. It looks like narrow gauge, but I'm not sure. It would be 3 6" probably. Now, I used to go here when I was decently younger, as in child, or a kid you could say too, when this thing was around and it had somewhat of a structure on top of it. However, it slowly rotted away. The trees and the leaves do not help. Over here is an old Pacific Electric halt or waiting station for Rio Vista, which is in much better condition. Now, this is a cable car from San Francisco, so interesting history about this one. So apparently, at least according to Wikipedia, take it or leave it and how you will, I cannot find a date of when this was built, but this car is technically on permanent loan from the city of San Francisco because they would not donate or sell, well, they wouldn't donate at least a car down here to Los Angeles. However, in all honesty, I would like to see this be taken back to San Francisco and actually get some love and attention that it desperately needs. Honestly, this car is in sad shape. It even has the old lettering. It says, a little hard to read, Presidio Avenue, California, and Market Street. Now, this set of equipment is pretty interesting. This is a 1921 Davenport Locomotive Works product, built for the Los Angeles Harbor District. This engine was built for that service and donated in 1952 to the Department of Parks and Recreation, which is part of Griffith Park and Travel Town. Now, one thing that they did do to this engine is replace the cab a few years ago. It's a nice little saddle tank. Right behind me there's the busy 134 Ventura Highway, so bear with me. So this is a 1913 American Locomotive Company Rogers Works. It was built for stock and at some point later sold to the Los Angeles Harbor District. It's a very small engine. Both of these are quite small, but this one is the larger, yet the older of the two. There's about 8 years between this engine and number 31. This is number 32. Now this beauty is somewhat of a rarity. A 3-truck Heisler locomotive. This was built by the Heisler Locomotive Works in Pennsylvania in 1918 for the Hetch Hetchy Railways number 2. Now, Santa Maria Valley 1000 was also Hetch Hetchy, but number 4, a little bit later. It was sold to the Standard Lumber Company in 1924, which became the Pickering Lumber Company in 1926. These geared engines always fascinate me. There's a little look at the mechanism there, and the rest of it. From the Pickering Lumber Company, it was donated in 1957 to Traveltown. This is a 1922 Class C Shay 3-cylinder 3-truck, built for the, wait, now I have to check that again too. Built for the Little River Redwood Company of California. It was sold in 1935 to the Camino Placerville and Lake Tahoe Railroad as number 2, and 1955 donated to the city of Los Angeles. Now, this isn't the interesting side. Here's the business end. Again, the geared locomotives always fascinate me. This is Consolidated Rock Products number 1. 060 saddle tank engine, built in 1924 by the American Locomotive Company, Cook Works. It was donated in 1957 to the city of Los Angeles. This operated around Azusa, California, and up in that area. Now, this locomotive is a 280 Consolidation type, built in 1909 by the American Locomotive Company at Schenectady. Western Pacific number 26 served the railroad until 1954, when donated to the city of Los Angeles and Traveltown. Now, when I was younger, you used to be able to climb inside of the cab of this thing, but not anymore, and I must say, it would need a new tender if it were to be restored to operating condition. Now, this car has quite the sad history to it. Well, somewhat sad, somewhat not, but I will just tell you the history because I can't remember its complexity offhand. So I'll just pause it right here and have Studio Me tell the history.
Now, this single truck car started out as 2 separate single truck cars built sometime in the 1890s for the Los Angeles Railway. The first car was originally numbered 405 and renumbered to 57 in about 1903 and became work car number 9311 in 1916. Now, the second car was numbered 59 by 1905 and became work car number 9411 in 1911. 9411 was sold in 1926 to Lasky Studios. Both cars would be sold to the Helpers of the Holy Souls Covenant by 1940, and both were donated to Traveltown in 1957. These operated on a loop around the park for Traveltown in the 1970s. These cars utilized gasoline engines for power, and this lasted till 1975. The cars would be restored between 1999 and 2005 using components from both trolleys to make a single trolley in place of the two.
Now this locomotive, which used to be a bit more garish than what it looks like now, is Stockton Terminal and Eastern Number 1. Now this has a bit of a complicated history, and it's the oldest piece of equipment of Traveltown. So Western Pacific Railroad purchased this engine when it was new, and it was built by the Norris Locomotive Works in 1864. That meant it had to be hauled from the east by ship in Philadelphia to California, and it operated not on the modern Western Pacific, but on the old one that was purchased by the Central Pacific. This became number 31, then it became Southern Pacific number 1193. Various renumberings to 1215 and 1488 before being sold in 1909 to Stockton Terminal and Eastern Number 1, and in 1953 it was donated to the city of Los Angeles. Now it is debatable how much of this engine is actually still original from 1864, because it was rebuilt in the early 1900s heavily. This little diesel is a EMD Model 40, one of 11 produced and even fewer surviving. Built in 1942 by EMD for service with the U.S. Navy in Rhode Island, it was eventually moved to San Diego for service at the Naval Air Station as number 1. Then it was sold in 1962 to McDonnell Douglas Aircraft of Torrance, California. Donated in 1988 to Traveltown. Mainly because this thing operated in Torrance, where I'm from, is why it's my favorite. Now, this little piece here is quite the story and quite the sad sight, honestly. This was built in 1880 by Baldwin as an 042 tram engine for the Market Street and Park Cliff Railroad number 2 of San Francisco. It eventually became part of the Market Street Railway, and in 1900 it was sold to Southern Pacific and numbered 20. Then it became part of the Maintenance of Way Department after serving as a suburban steam engine for transit service. Then it became Los Angeles Shop Switcher number 5. Later renumbered 2443 and then number 219. It was moved in 1921 up north to the Bayshore Shops up in San Francisco. Then it was purchased by Gerald Best, railroad historian, in 1947, and it was donated to the city of Los Angeles by Gerald Best. This engine was one of the engines that served in the opening of Los Angeles Union Station in 1938 or 39. Now this is another 280 consolidation type, built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1899, originally numbered 891. Santa Fe, number 664, got its number in 1900, and it was donated in the mid-1950s to Traveltown. This is one of the older 280s I've seen. Not the oldest, though. Now this rail car, also could be called a doodlebug, is Santa Fe number M177. Built in 1929 by Pullman with an EMD engine, it was restored by Traveltown between 2003 and 2020. Now it is fully operational. However, they don't have much track to operate it on. Now, this diesel locomotive is somewhat unique. This is a Baldwin Lima Hamilton RS-12, built in 1955 for the McCloud River Railroad. I'm not sure when, but it was eventually sold to the California Western Railroad and numbered 56. And it was donated to Traveltown sometime in in 1992. It operated until 1970 on the California Western. Donated 1992 to Traveltown. This is another one of those things that has a bit of a complex history, so I'll just tell you in voiceover.
This car was built by American Car and Foundry Works in 1911 as Interurban Electric Railway number 379 for service in the Bay Area of Oakland, California. It was sold in 1942 to the United States Maritime Commission, keeping number 379 for service in Los Angeles for the war effort. In 1944, Pacific Electric purchased this car along with many others, and this car was renumbered to 4640. In 1947, it was renumbered to Pacific Electric 435. 1953, the car became part of Metropolitan Coach Lines and kept its number. 1958, it was renumbered to Los Angeles Metropolitan Transit Authority number 1543 and became the only blimp or only piece of Pacific Electric equipment to be colored in LAMTA green. Hence the paint job looking like green and the Pacific Electric red. And in 1961, the car was donated to Traveltown.
Another favorite of mine. Pacific Electric 1544, built in 1902 by the North Shore Railway for electric operations. It was eventually acquired by Southern Pacific and helped with the rebuilding of San Francisco after the earthquake. Purchased in 1918 by Pacific Electric, it served at the Torrance maintenance shops until retirement in 1952, when it was donated to Traveltown. Now, this locomotive is a 1902 Alco Dixon product, American Locomotive Company Dixon Works, out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Now, this is a 262, but it was originally a 260 engine. It was sold in 1909. At that time, it was reconfigured into 262 to the Sharp & Fellows Contracting Company of Gardena, California, which is still in business. Even has old arch bar style trucks. Donated in 1955 to the city of Los Angeles and has been on display at Traveltown ever since. Numbered 7 by the Sharp & Fellows Contracting. And the last locomotive to highlight is Union Pacific number 4439. Now, this locomotive was built in 1921 by what I believe is the Lima Locomotive Works of Ohio. It is an 060 switcher, which originally operated in Cheyenne. Later, it was assigned to the Harbor Belt Line in Los Angeles Harbor. This, in 1957, was the last regularly operating steam locomotive in Los Angeles. And it is a great thing that it was preserved, I'll say. Union Pacific 4439. You can even go in the cab of this one. As with the rest of these engines, it is also oil-fired. There are Sharp & Fellows and the rest of the collection. So fellas, that's it for this video. I know I didn't go inside that building, but it's closed at the moment, mainly because it's only open on weekends and it's a weekday today, so thank you for watching this video. If you like this sort of content, please consider subscribing. It does help me out, and I have a decent amount of other stuff in the works right now. So until next time, this is Nate for Vintage Rails, and until then, God bless.